Well, hello, everybody. Thank you so much for checking out another episode of the OTK Podcast. I am your host, Caleb, and this is the show where we discuss anything and everything that is shaping the world today. For this episode, we have an awesome guest. Dr. Redwine has been more than gracious to open up his home and let us shoot here and ask him a few questions. Thank you, Dr. Redwine, for being on the program.
It's great to be here today.
I am so excited because while this is a little bit of a morbid topic, this is something that absolutely fascinates me. Today, we're going to be discussing what it takes to make a school shooter, the kind of the pathology behind a young person that would want to take their frustrations out in a mass violent act. So we'll just go ahead and jump right in. If you'd explain your background as far as how this is your specialty and your history in this topic.
Well, I will say that I am not an expert in school shooters. I haven't written a book on it or anything like that, but my background is working in residential care with troubled teenagers. And in saying that, I don't want to think that every teenager is a potential shooter.
Yeah.
So I had teenagers I looked at in three different categories. One, the bump of the night kid, the type of kid that had a trauma or a loss, and they just really needed help getting back on their feet.
Right.
Then two, you have the kid that has a little bit more long-term type of a problem, but not necessarily aggressive. They may have some attachment issues where they really push people away. They may be oppositional defiant. You hear that term. They're usually reacting to something in the home or reacting to something in the school, but typically not in both places. You have a lot of oppositional kids here. They're argumentative. They're defiant. They give you a hard time. Then you have that conduct sort of kid. Now, that's the kind of kid that if you don't turn him around, he's probably going to end up behind bars at some point because he thinks none of the rules apply to him. And these conduct sort of kids are still not the antisocial kid. The antisocial kid has no conscience. The conduct sort of kid is really more your narcissist. It's all about me. And they can get really brash and loud and even combative, but not combative because they're just making a stand and they're yelling and screaming, but not so much. Antisocial, they're very quiet.
Makes sense.
You never can tell what's on their mind, and they're usually doing something behind your back, and you can't trust them. Those are the ones that will definitely end up typically in jail if something doesn't happen. So the school shooters may not fit into any of those categories. That's typically what you see. I'm a licensed mental health therapist and an addictions therapist, and I've worked with children and teens since 1981.
Okay. So to clarify, he doesn't like to call himself, I know some of his background. You've worked extensively with hyperviolent young people in different capacities at different facilities and those kinds of things. So you've seen the kind of kids that if not intervened, or if there wasn't an intervention at some point, could have very well been one of these individuals.
Yeah, a lot of times you see parents that call and say, "Could you please help me? We're having to lock ourselves in our bedroom at night. He's threatening to kill us." And they're fearful, and even today that's happening still regularly. Now, the work I do now, we actually go into the home, into the community, and try to reach the kids because a lot of residential programs have closed down. That type of, just like back in the 70s when mental health institutions closed,
right?
Because you cannot force someone to get mental treatment. The same with residential. You can't keep kids and make kids get help. And so that's one of the battles you have here with our culture right now. So we go to the kid and try to intervene. The problem is if they don't want you to intervene, they don't have to.
That makes sense. So in the uptick of, and maybe you can debunk it, maybe there really isn't as much of a, I know people are throwing words around like epidemic, which I don't think it's to that level when you look at the number of kids perpetrating mass violent acts in school. It's not nearly as high as the media likes to paint it as, but it seems to be there is a increase in frequency, maybe it's just national attention, but what do you attribute this increase to? I mean, why is it that there seems to be some years where we'll go 4 years without some big thing happening, and then all of a sudden you'll have two within 9 months of each other?
Well, you have copycats. I mean, you have a lot of, even when you see some of the events like that just happened up in Toronto, Canada, where the man ran down with a rental van, killing people, there's people that are cheering him, calling him a hero. How is it we have a culture where people can see a mass slaughter and think that somehow this person's heroic? So I'm sitting back here after being in this field for many years going, what in the world is wrong with our culture?
Yeah.
So there's something happening, and we have created the problem, and we don't know how to fix it.
That's good. So I know a lot of the conversation after a school shooting or after something like that is a big push for gun control. What are your thoughts on, because I've always seen it as, when you look at how many guns there are in the United States versus you look how many people actually die from gun violence, excluding suicides, you see that it seems somewhat unpractical to blame the gun or to blame those actions. And you don't hear nearly as much. You don't have a politician that makes a little 30-second quip about the importance of mental health. But in reality, from your clinical perspective, what is driving that behavior, and also what can a society do? I mean, what is the most effective thing that a society can do to try to curb some of that within specifically the young males?
Let me go and kind of build up toward the answer about guns.
Okay.
One, our society has changed so deeply. Back in the day when I was growing up, the center of the community was the church, the school, and the family. Mm-hmm. And they communicated. Everybody went to church on Sunday. The teacher would get mad, they'd call mom. Dad would get you when you got home. I mean, everybody worked together. That's not happening now. So one of the things that's happened with boys, and if you know, most of the shooters are white men.
Right.
Well, let's look at it culturally. One, you have more and more fathers out of the home. Mm-hmm. And now, William Farrell has written a book called The Boy Crisis, where he specifically talks about this. And many will say, if you notice one particular thing, all these men, even the shooter out in Vegas, didn't have a father. And so you have a real father absence that's driving something. We have to look at the fact that you have such violence everywhere. I don't know if you've ever played any of the video games.
Oh, no, never. Not one violent video game.
You can't sit there and shoot and watch blood splatter and then even look at the movies. I'm sorry, but we have a violent culture. Mm-hmm. And we've grown this. We'll go to movies and pay all kinds of money to see it. It's just a part of our culture now. But I was showing something the other day. Do you know there are professional cuddlers?
I watched a Vice interview about professional it blew my mind.
And so now you can pay, I can get certified. I'm thinking about doing that. I can get certified and charge $80 an hour to cuddle somebody. It's a non-sexual holding.
Right.
Where you actually are just cuddling with a person. Yeah. And it's supposed to have all kind of boundaries and everything on it. But here's the thing. In looking at the website the other night, the lady said this: if a man hugs a man, people think he's gay. If a man hugs a woman, she's wondering whether or not he's coming on to her sexually or might think he's putting a move on her.
Right.
If a man hugs a child,
it's creepy.
He thinks he's a sexual predator. He's creepy. Yeah. So men can't hug anybody. So you have these men that have been bereft of touch. You know, there are single people in our world that can go days and weeks without being touched. And think about that. We are built for relationship. We're built for community. We're built for hugs. We had the big hug thing years ago about you got to have so many hugs a day. Well, here we have people then that can go for a month without being held.
Yeah.
So now we have professional cuddlers that'll do that for you. But what happens to society when we don't touch each other? Now we have it in our schools, you cannot touch a child. In many states, you can't even pat them on the back, tell them good job. You can't give them a hug. You're not allowed to hug children. Now, that tactile stimulation, boys need it, man. You rustle their hair and wrestle them down a little bit, but you can't do that anymore.
Right.
Because it could be construed as being sexual in nature or dominating and physical. And so we're having a cultural bias here against being male. We're being demasculized.
Oh.
And out in the University of Texas, I don't know if you just heard this, but out in Texas, they're having a class at the university on how to demasculinize male.
Yeah, I was reading about it.
So you have a culture here that's saying you can't be a male anymore. You can't touch anybody, you can't hold anybody, you can't. And what's it creating in the minds of our men? Mm-hmm. Well, I think what we're dealing with here is we're dealing with thinking errors. And there are critical thinking errors and there are criminal thinking errors. And somewhere our critical thinking errors crosses over to a criminal one. And what you find out is most of your problems, most of your sins, most of your failures all starts here in the mind. Mm-hmm. People get obsessive. They think about it. Now, for Toronto, for this Manassan man or whatever his name is up there, and I don't like to use their names, but he was an incel. He was an involuntary celibate. And you had Rogers as the same one that went on a shooting spree and a driving spree and a stabbing spree because I don't want to be celibate. I want to have sex with a woman, but no woman will give me the time of day. So I'm going to make them pay. If you look at some of the things that man wrote, Rogers wrote on social media, they're angry. They're angry about either feeling like they've been dissed or some been disrespected or not being treated right. So they want to take that anger out. And they get it up here in their mind. And they think it through, and they think it through, and they plan it, and they plot it, and they obsess about it. Next thing you do is you go out and act it out. So whether or not they're going to use a gun, it's not important. There are countries in the world like Australia, the UK, they have very strict gun laws. Well, more people now have been killed in the UK with vehicles, 140, than have previous to that in guns in 98. So now we have a rash of people going around slicing and cutting and stabbing people. We're going to find some way to do it. Guns are just an easy way. Yeah, we may need some more gun control, but really the laws are there. You can't buy a gun without a background check.
Right.
So I don't think you're changing your laws is going to do it, but that's making the issue we're not going to ban cars, we're not going to ban rental vehicles, we're not going to ban
right.
knives. So our culture then has produced men that are angry. And I think another thing that's happened is men don't have anything to fight for anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you have so many fathers they abandon their families, their dads aren't in the home, the moms, you see football players, hello mom, but never see them say hi dad.
Oh, that's good.
I did a group a number of years ago, a substance abuse group with all teenage boys on probation here, and I asked them, how many of you have father in the home? None of them raised their hand.
Wow.
And they all said this, we can't wait till Dad gets out of prison because then we have money because he sells drugs. When he's in prison, we don't have money.
Wow.
So there's a mentality out there that the dad's not important, and we kind of built around it with some of our policies. You know, the more kids you have and the more food stamps you get, the more. So we have some dependency there, and oftentimes the dad is in the home, they just don't report that. So the dads are becoming obsolete. They're becoming unimportant.
So what role does that dad play? Because we'll get a little bit farther down to demographics in just a second. But what role, does the dad play in preventing that action? I mean, is it a you mentioned the idea of roughhousing. I mean, is one of the big benefits of having a dad in the home that you can learn what is too much when you're being aggressive, when you're being playful, is it a testing ground for how much aggression is healthy, or is it more a reining in of rebellion?
So you want me to get in trouble for being sexist, right? Because when I talk about the role of the father and the role of the mother in the home, I get called sexist.
Right.
The mother is the emotional CEO of the family. She's the executive director of feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And that child, as they're growing up, are so tied into the mother's feelings and emotions that they know when mom's sad, they know when she's mad, they know when she's upset, they know when she's mad at dad.
Right.
She can come walking out of her bedroom and they'll know whether or not how mom's feeling because they are tied into mom's emotions. At some point in life, then those kids have to switch off from mother's emotions. They got to actually pick up on dad's. Dad has got to help them sometimes separate out from that role of mother. You always see kids all the time, oh, mother, will you get off my back? Mom, will you get out? Mother, they get tired of it because they got to figure out who they are apart from their emotional mother.
Right.
I'm sorry, I don't want to say emotional mother. Apart from the emotions of their mother.
Right.
Because moms can be pretty dominant, and you want to. She's got to get the strong, emotional, healthy foundation in that child.
Right.
But then when it crosses over in adolescence, dad's got to step in. And I always ask this question. What mother can teach their son to be a man?
That's good.
The dad has to do that. So it comes the time for a single mom because dad's left, and this young boy has to have a man in his life. Dad's gone.
Makes sense.
So she calls the church. She goes out in public. She tries to get him in clubs, get him into sports, get some type of a coach that'll put in and speak into the life of this kid. They've called me sometimes, would you mentor my boy? We just mentor him. I just need someone to come and spend time with him. And I even have a kid that I still go see. He's not a client anymore. But there's nobody in his life. And so they say, well, do you keep going and seeing him just so he has contact with a male? I said, yeah, so I do that. We need men to step up back into that role. I say this, and again, I'm not trying to be sexist. Mothers lead with their heart.
Right.
Fathers lead with their voice. And so when you have the heart of the mother and the voice of the father speaking into a kid, there's balance. There is. Okay, how should I feel about this? My girlfriend just dumped me. Guess what? Oftentimes boys, especially, they want to go talk to their mother.
Right.
Right? Mom, but she dumped me. Okay, that's our son. And mom will say the soothing things, right? Dad will say what? Well, son, you're going to learn that something is going to happen in life.
Yeah.
the response is going to be different. So it gets the cognitive voice model, and it gets the and there's nothing wrong with emotions, the emotive heart model. Well, there's a balance there in the family. That balance has been gone. And even if you have the mother and father still involved, if there's a divorce, and it's a bad divorce, they're not speaking to each other, not communicating, they're talking down each other. And oftentimes if the father's had an affair or something like that, he's all the time being put down. Let's say then you have a boy whose father did something bad, maybe went to jail, and then the kid's wondering, well, what about me?
Yeah.
Or if the father commits suicide, and the boy's like, why did my dad commit suicide? What if and oftentimes those kids become suicidal as well. So, when you look at the culture, we're not winning this war.
Yeah.
We're losing it. And what we've done now is the only way kids can really get help is we call the police.
Yeah.
We criminalize the behavior. So now if you have a kid running away and they're truant from school, I'll call the police, have them arrested. Like, when did being truant from school become a legal issue?
Yeah.
But because, again, you can't, we're holding the mom, we're going to throw you in jail if your son doesn't go to... All we produce is kids that have to be controlled by the law, not controlled by the family or controlled by the church or controlled by the schools.
Right.
Principals can't touch them. There's so many examples out in our society. There was down in Florida a few years ago, a little girl that was tearing up the assistant principal's office. She's 5 or 6 years old. And it's probably about 8 years ago. And they had been training some teachers that day, and they had videotape. And they show the assistant principal going like this. This is unacceptable. This is unacceptable. This is unacceptable.
Because he can't touch her.
He can't touch her.
Yeah.
She's tearing stuff off. She's up on the table, jumping up and down. Call the mother. It's your problem. She's at school. I'm not coming. And the mother refused to come several times.
Wow.
So they called in the sheriff.
What could they do?
Deputy comes in, female male deputies. They come in. So they go around, flash some handcuffs on her. Oh, the uproar. What are we doing handcuffing our kids? Little girl. What are they supposed to do?
Yeah, what options do they have at that point?
In the old days, flip around, put her in a basket hole, sit down on the ground, let her pound against you a little bit, and then she'd relax. Okay, I quit doing this, but you can't do a basket hole anymore. You can't do a takedowns. You can't do
any of these things.
So you have principals doing this because they're not in charge of the schools. They can't say, hey, I'm not putting up with this anymore.
Yeah.
No more paddling, no more corporal punishment, no more consequence for the things we do. In a family, you get boundaries. In a family, you get an education on what's right. So your son steals something out of a store. Let's go, boy, mom or dad. We're going to walk him right down there. You're going to apologize. You're going to give this back. And then you're going to ask him what you have to do to pay for it. That stuff's not happening anymore.
Yeah.
And not as much, I'd say. So our culture has changed. So now let's look on the other side. All of a sudden, maybe no one knows your name. You go to school, and look how we used to have small high schools. Now I've gone to some of these campuses. Man, they're awesome.
Huge, yeah, huge campuses.
And back then, maybe you were known by being in the band or being on the sports team or being whatever you had your identity from. How do kids get an identity today in school?
Yeah.
So you have more identity through how they dress or the color of their hair, the type of stuff. So we have more tolerance for that. But they don't stand out in the crowd. So how do you get so you create a crisis, you create drama, you create intensity. You're known as a bad kid or this or that. And so kids say, oh, I'm going to really do this upright. I'm going to go buy some guns and do it.
So as we're talking about the role of the father, what is the difference? Because you made the comment previously that most of these people that are committing these violent acts, predominantly, almost exclusively are white young males. And as we talk about the connection between fatherlessness and race or profiling an individual, to be clear, the after the fact profiling, why is it that white young males seem to do this more, despite the fact that percentage-wise, there's more fatherlessness in the African-American community?
Amen.
I mean, they seem to spread, statistically speaking, not to speak in generalities, but they seem to spread their anger more towards people within their community versus, projecting some kind of, you read the letters of a school shooter or someone that's committed a violent act, and you can see a deep delusion in the fact, oh, that person was laughing at me, or that person was, and realistically, the description of the situation isn't in touch with the reality. So what are the cultural differences? Because there seem to be some. What are the cultural differences that make me go, I'm angry, I don't have a dad, I want to be heard and known for something, so I'm going to shoot a rival gang member or somebody that I disagree with and have a one-on-one tiff with, versus a culture that seems to say, people, and who knows if it's culture saying it, but a culture of young people that say, oh, to get attention or to get heard, I'm going to go after somebody that has no personal connection to me.
I don't know. In the black culture, you have more black on black crime. And if you talk to the police, you'll find out most of that's drug related. Mm-hmm. And I think when, if you see the number of fathers that are in prison and in jail, when we lost, this may get political. When we lost so many jobs, there were men that were able to build the American dream.
Right.
All of a sudden the jobs disappeared. If you go around here on the south side of our community here, there are International Harvest, a big factory just shut down. Those men had jobs and they were paid well, and they were living the American dream. And oftentimes now, the ones that left to go get other jobs are the ones that stayed.
Right.
Drugs. So there's drugs pouring in from over the border, and they're coming in here, whether it's heroin, meth. It's easy money to make. I remember one boy who I was working with. He was 15. No, he was older. He was 16, getting ready to turn 17, so where he could drop out of school. And he'd gotten arrested. He had a wreck on his little moped, and he had drugs on him, marijuana, and he got put on probation. He had to go 10 weeks of group class. At the end, I was doing his discharge, and I said, why in the world are you selling drugs for anyway? You know what he said to me?
What?
He said, you're the first person that ever asked me that. My dad's in prison. My mom's mentally ill. She can't work. We all live with my grandma, and someone has to take care of her. So I'm selling drugs to buy food and keep the lights on. But now that I've been on probation, I can't do that. We don't have any money. And I was called afterwards, hey, have you got that discharge? And I said, well, I'm typing it up right now. I just saw the kid today. He says, it's good because I want to get this taken care of because he's being booted out of the house they're living in. He and his mom and his grandma would get sued. So that was, he was actually taking care of his grandmother and taking care of his mother by selling drugs and trying to go to school. Mm-hmm. So we're doing something wrong if the only example of dad is sell drugs and make money. But when you have these predominantly white men that are going out and acting out, I think you have some entitlement and some privilege there. I think, how many times are guys thinking they're it?
Yeah.
I'm the cool one, I'm this, I'm that. And if you don't get your dreams realized the way you think they should be, that's narcissism that comes out, I'll take care of myself. We have an entire culture now that thinks you got to fight. In saying this, back in my day in high school, we had guns in our trucks.
Right. Going
hunting afterwards. They had guns on campus. It was never a deal. But out back at the high school, that's where you fought.
Right.
Back in the gym, you come down, and that was off campus, so that's where you fought down there. And the teachers would come out and be smoking there. They'd watch the fights.
Make sure nobody killed each other. Yeah. But other than that, not
no knives, no guns. You duke it out. Fight. Okay, that's enough. He's down. Let him go. The teacher told you, all right, that's enough. Come on, break it up. Shake hands. You walk back into school and back to class.
Unimaginable now.
Yes, but there was a time that we actually fought and settled things, not shoot and make statements. And something's happened again where we've lost that capacity to set boundaries and actually to problem solve. Instead of, okay, I got this problem with the guy, what am I going to do? I'm going to go challenge him, I'm going to go talk to him about it. If it comes to it, we'll be fisticuffs, we'll settle it, and we'll go on as men. That just doesn't happen anymore nowadays.
So what makes somebody, because I was bullied. I'm like 3 feet tall now and still look like a 12-year-old. So, when I was younger, it was that much worse. And to be honest, I would carry a knife or something in my backpack in case more than one guy cornered me. I was like, okay, well, at least I can scare him away kind of thing. But I never once thought about, did I think about hurting people that were trying to hurt me? Absolutely. That doesn't seem weird to me. But the idea of taking it out on people, because, the thing you often hear is, oh, well, these poor kids, they were mentally ill and just being picked on, and we weren't doing enough to protect them. We weren't doing all of these things. I remember getting bullied. I never thought to kill the girl that sat 3 seats from me. I thought, if anything, I'm going to take out the guy that keeps beating me up in the locker room. But what is the difference in the mindset of somebody that says, I'm going to take out the person causing problems for me versus just a broad, I'm just going to make sure, because if they are bullied, why aren't they tracking down the people that are bullying them? Why is it just I walk in the cafeteria and start firing away?
And again, I don't think it's always the issue of bullying. We've talked about bullying. We've got it out in the forefront. We're talking about, we bring up issues in our culture and we talk about it. Now, people say this is mental illness. I don't know that they're all mentally ill. I don't want to.
Really? That's fascinating.
I don't know that I would say that you have to be mentally ill to kill somebody. Now, because when they start blaming everything on mental illness, I go, oh my gosh, I'm bipolar, I may be violent, I'm schizophrenic, I may be violent. No, a lot of people have mental health disorders. It doesn't mean they're violent or going to cause harm.
Right.
So what you're dealing with here is you're dealing with an old concept that we don't talk about much. It's evil.
Mm-hmm.
There's a point where you can cross a line and just become an evil person.
Mm-hmm.
You know, one of the questions you ask is, how do you tell the signs?
Mm-hmm.
With a Nicholas Cruz. They all know it. They said, someone's going to be a school shooter.
It's going to be him, yeah.
And what was that one guy's name I talked about? Rogers guy, who was the incel. People were concerned about him. They went to his house, knocked on his door, the police did. And if you look at some of his writings, he said, I was scared they were going to come in the house and they would have uncovered me. Found my guns, found my stuff, everything I wanted to do to hurt these women. But they're not allowed to do that anymore.
Right.
You're not allowed to, and even though everyone thought that maybe this Cruz character, he was from a broken home, adopted, father died, mother died, he was in a crisis, why he would go out and shoot somebody, that does not make sense. For me, even as a mental health technician, I can't figure out how you make that step from depression. But we talk about the symptoms. Let me ask you this question. If we could read the symptoms, why can't we stop suicide?
That's a good point.
There are so many people in the United States, many, many more that die of suicide, self-inflicted wounds, than we have in school shootings.
Mm-hmm.
And people, after a suicide, say, why didn't we see it? I thought maybe, why didn't I ask him? Why didn't I talk to him? Maybe it's the social disconnect in our society. But if we could read symptoms, if we could read and figure it out, even from my years of being in this field, I miss it.
Yeah.
I had a client that killed a girl. Wow. I met with him just a week before. I did not see anything in that guy that I would have said. I even put him on reports. This guy's he's not aggressive.
Wow.
But he got on drugs and he ended up killing her. He choked her. Well, I did not see that coming. So I don't know so much as mental illness or there's just an evil in the heart of man. And I think we have a society that doesn't like to hear the word no.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you look at there's a lot of anger in our society right now.
Mm-hmm.
And you see it coming out in the politics.
Right.
The most tolerant people of all are really not tolerant at all.
Right.
They're really angry and they want people to pay. And even with that, listened to the radio today where a member of a certain party was saying, if you get involved in a presidential election with that party, you're going to pay. We're going to take you down. We're going to humiliate you. We're going to run you out just like we did to Dr. Jackson. Someone's saying this publicly?
Wow. Yeah. I'm not scared.
And so there's a lack of, we talked about tolerance for years. There's no tolerance. We talked about communication. There's no communication. So when you have a kid or a male that thinks no one cares, I'm not important, I'm going to kill myself, I'm going to kill somebody else. I really think that's what it comes down to. But I don't think there's any easy answer. I don't think anyone can really guess why. And again, for me, if I could read the symptoms, I'd stop a lot of suicides. You can't read that. So can I say I can read the symptoms of a killer? I'm sorry, they saw it in Cruz. You can't do anything. Here's an example. There was a mother down in Florida not too long ago who was acting a little crazy. And her sister called the police and said, I think my sister's going to hurt her children. The police went up to the van. They pulled it over. She talked rationally. She talked just like Rogers did, just like Cruz would have done, just like they don't sound crazy. And so the police let her go. It's down in Florida. She drove to the ocean, drove the van out into the ocean, trying to drown the children.
Oh, my.
People came out, they drug the kids out. And when they asked the police, well, why didn't you do something? And here's your answer. It's not against the law to be mentally ill.
Right.
There's no law against it. It's only against the law if you actually try to do something.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't get arrested and get treatment until you actually commit a crime.
Mm.
Other than that, you cannot force anyone into treatment. So even if you can read the symptoms, this guy may be a problem, you have to get a warrant to be able to go and check and see if he has anything. If you say, we want to get you in for treatment, I don't want to, I'm going to sign myself out and leave. You can't force people to get help. That's the reason we have a big drug crisis.
Mm-hmm.
We can have treatment centers, the person's got to want to go. So we're left with a crisis right here in Indiana. The DCS department, taking care of children because of the opioid crisis, is $284 million in the hole. Because there's so many kids being removed from families because of the drug crisis.
Right.
And you'll hear the police train and talk about, give somebody Narcan, an hour later they're back and give them another Narcan because they keep going back to doing it.
Right.
Because of the addictive portion of it. So we have a problem that we can't control because it's up to the person to do it. So when a person's left to themselves and they don't have the capacity, internal or character strength or whatever, and I think one of the things is, your number 7, what does faith play in these situations? Or is there can they be rehabilitated? Or they're connected to a community such as youth or college? Yes, yes, and yes.
Here, before you, I want to just read real fast the questions that he's referencing for those that we were going to get to. So what he was saying yes to is some of our later questions was this idea of what role does faith play in changing the life of a potential a violent offender, or can they be rehabilitated, or a lot of people argue that the death penalty is the only fix for that kind of problem. So go ahead and continue your.
When you see, I don't know if you've ever been in any prisons. I've been in a number of prisons, federal and state, and there's a real identity there. The gangs that are in there, the part that you play. And I've also worked with these men as they've gotten out of federal prison, sit around the table. In the prison, they were enemies.
Right.
Right? All of a sudden now it's down the street. There's no animosity. There's no...
Yeah.
But there's an identity in there, just like we have identity in gangs. We fight this gang issue with the kids. Men are looking for something to be identified with.
Right.
When these men get out of prison, when I'm counseling them, and for everybody I say this, I want you to find 3 people that can speak into your life. I have a client I'm working with right now. Do you have 3 men that if they call you up and say, man, you're acting crazy, or you're not thinking right, you need to get over here, would you listen to them? And I want you to identify 3 men. I want you to actually call or go over and see them and say, will you help me so I don't relapse and go back to prison? Will you help me so I won't snap and go out and try to hurt somebody? And I want you to come back and give me their names, give me their numbers, and make sure you've actually contacted them. And so when I get these men, they get 3 other men that they can call. In other words, get some support.
Right.
Because after the time of treatment, I'm not going to be around anymore. Who are you going to call?
Yeah.
Call those 3 men. And sometimes I've had those men call in, had those men come in. Has he asked you about that? Yeah, he's asked me about it. I'm going to be there for him. Where you have that camaraderie coming.
Yeah.
So yeah, if they can get involved, to get teenagers involved in a youth group, oh my goodness. But what do you have sometimes youth group? Well, they want certain kind of kids in our church.
No, never. That's never happened anywhere.
And what you're fighting is, if you look at not what I say, but what secular writers and researchers say, right? If you look at some of these unbonded kids, like Cruz would have been. There's a book written a number of years ago in the 80s called Children at Risk. And in chapter 7 of that book, it says this. These kids, and they'll say that these kids can't be reached, they can't be changed, they can't be educated, they can't be. But if they have an intense personal relationship with God, they have an intense personal transformation, they become bonded to God, and they actually change.
These are secular writers.
Yeah.
saying.
I found several people that said, well, the only thing you do is hopefully God will get a hold of them. Now, it's amazing that, and you'll see this sometimes on Facebook, but we don't allow the Bible really in schools.
Mm-hmm.
But there are Bibles in prisons. There are Bibles. I don't know if you know this or not, but there was a study that was done a number of years ago, back in the 60s, on can you rehabilitate prisoners. And so Dr. Stanton Samenou, who's the expert in the criminal mind, wrote the book Inside the Criminal Mind. He and a psychiatrist went into this prison, and they said, we're not going to have a moral component. We're going to take it out. It's going to be based upon behavior and thinking. Mm-hmm. We're going to change their thinking, thus we're not going to have a moral component. They launched it in the prison in the 60s, and within 6 months they threw it out and said it doesn't work. You must have a moral component to change a man. And this is the term he uses in his books. I used it in my doctorate. He must actually die to the old self, and a new man must be reborn. That was a word.
The irony, yeah.
Not any scriptural. He says no, because he was not a Christian, not anything support of that. But there was something about, you got to die. You got to die completely. You got to die to these old thinking errors. And so I went up for training for the federal, I ran the federal program at this place I worked at, and you had to go for training. So I went into the prison. As we're walking back to the wing where it's called the drug rehabilitation program is, the guard with me says, and that's our faith wing. I said, faith wing? Oh yeah, every prison has them. This is where if you want to go and be in the faith wing, you have to earn your way in there. You get up in the morning, you have devotions. You have to, behavior's got to be good. But because when Prison Fellowship did a study in Texas, they found out that people actually change. This whole come to Jesus in jail thing, it actually works sometimes. And so every federal prison has a faith wing where if you want to go there and study the Bible and be a part of a faith community, you can be. And nobody knows that.
That's the first time I'm hearing it.
So right beside the drug and rehab, you've got that one. Because it works. So if you can become bonded to God, and that's why, again, the more we pull kids out of church, the more people are disconnected in our community. They're on their phones doing this stuff, but they're not really getting in. People say about hypocrisy and all this in the church. Our churches have got to reach out, not just to boys, but also to girls and to adults. Mm-hmm. And let people, it's got to be a welcoming place. But you know what? They also have to say, sorry, you're living a sinful life.
Right.
What you're doing, the anger, you got to put this at the cross. But we have to have a spiritual solution to some of these things. Instead, we're going to make it mental health, we're going to make it medical, we're going to make it criminal, we're going to make it all these things that's not working.
Interesting. Okay, so before we go, this is such a negative topic, and the whole conversation of school shootings and violent kids is always very, down. Give me your best story of a kid that seemed unsavable, untreatable, terrifying situation, and you were able to come in and really make a difference in where they could end up. In case there's parents watching that have kids in these situations, or a teacher, or a youth pastor, whoever it is that thinks, oh, this kid can never change. Give me your worst kid that ended up somewhere later on in life.
Oh, I've got 2 or 3 of those. I had one boy many years ago in the 80s who was probably the toughest kid I ever worked with. The guy was 6'2". I had 2 of them. One guy had punched out 7 foster fathers.
Wow, 7?
Yeah. And another guy was just, he was angriest kid. And back in the day, we used to give swats. And he would come, hey, Mr. Redwine, give me some swats. I said, why? You haven't done anything wrong. I know, I want them. Now, that's someone who has such guilt for what they've done that they want to feel some pain.
Yeah.
Kids don't feel pain nowadays. So I said, but you haven't done anything. I'm going to give you swats. You haven't done anything. Okay, I'll go punch a teacher. I'll be right back. Oh, no, come here. Well, no, go punch a teacher. How many you want? I don't know, give me 8. So I give him 8 swats. Nah, that wasn't enough. Give me a couple more. All right. And it's amazing then when this kid would stand and hug me and say, thanks, I'll be back tomorrow. Now, that's somebody who's living with a lot of guilt, a lot of self-hatred. So after his mother died of alcohol poisoning, divorce situation, dad made it. He had a really good life, became a millionaire. Mom went into alcoholism and died. He decided he wanted to make his dad pay. And so he started hitting his father's clients. I mean, knock on the door, hold a gun, tie him up, rob him.
Wow.
After his 5th client, Dad said, it's my son. It's armed robbery. Blindfold him. I mean, so he ends up in prison over in Illinois. And he would call me from prison. I was still overseas. At times I get this calls. I said, how are you calling me? Oh, I'm a ways. I said, how do you make an international call
From prison.
I have my ways. Don't worry about it. I have my ways. And I said, why are you calling me for? He said, I just want to talk to somebody that never gave up on me.
Wow.
And we would wrestle constantly. And the last day that I was leaving, he was still down there. He said, can we wrestle one more time? Can we wrestle one more? I've never been able to beat you. I said, dude, I have wrestled you for 6 months.
Yeah.
And he beat me. You're not trying. So I wrestled again. I said, bud, I would rather lose to let you know that you're of value and worth to win than to think you always got to be a loser. So he called me up afterwards. He'd gotten out. He lied about somebody dying, and he'd gotten out. So he starts calling me from prison. So he called me one day. He said, hey, Mr. Redwine. I said, hey, how's things going in prison? I'm out. I said, you're out? Said, yeah, I got out. I said, how'd you get out? Good behavior. I said, excuse me? What do you mean good behavior? You're in high security prison in Illinois for 8 years. He said, well, I was sitting in solitary confinement one day. And I was looking back over my life. I was in there 23 hours in because of fighting. I said, I'm ashamed of the things I had to do to survive in prison. And as I was sitting in this cell, kind of walking through my entire life, I got to the time that I was in your program for 6 months. Just as I sat there, I realized that was the only time in my life I ever felt loved. Wow. I was like, dang, I fought this guy almost every day. We wrestled, swatted him. He was in my face. He said, it was the only time I ever felt loved. He said, I started crying. And it shocked me that I was crying in prison. Then I realized if that's a love that's strong enough to pierce the walls of a prison, it's the kind of love I want to give my heart to. And I called the chaplain and gave my heart to Jesus Christ. Wow. So the radical change in me was so great that they let me out on good behavior. I said, I'm stunned right now. I can't even hardly speak. And so you say, can they be rehabilitated? Yeah. Now, if you got somebody doing a school shooting, they're not going to get out of prison.
Right.
They're not going to get out. And so for many of them, they never go to prison because they kill themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, this is the guy that was the toughest guy I ever worked with. He called me up, a couple years later. Hey, Mr. Redwine. Hey, how you doing? I'm scared, man. I'm scared. I said, you're scared? Yeah, I got to talk to somebody. I said, what are you scared about? Who will scare you? He said, my wife's pregnant. I'm going to be a dad.
Oh.
It's scaring me to death. I don't know how to be a father.
Yeah.
Just tell me about being a dad. Again, getting back to the voice of the Father. And so I spent 2 times talking to him on the phone, just talking to him about being a father. He has a great son. I still have contact with him. The kid's a great kid. Even though his father was an ex-felon, the kid is doing wonderful. And the guy's still doing okay, too. He didn't go back to prison.
Wow. I would say that counts as a hope story. So if there's anybody watching, listening that thinks that there's a young person that can't be saved, let this be a testimony to the incredible things that can happen. And I just want to take a second. I don't usually do this on the podcast, but I want to take a second. If you're watching this and you know somebody, people talk a lot about society and the fact that we owe our kids, and then they'll talk about gun control, they'll talk about mental health, all these things. But it's very rare to hear someone say, we owe our kids relationship, we owe our kids love. And I would encourage you, if there's somebody that is struggling that whether it's a friend of one of your kids or whether it's somebody in your youth group or church situation, take the time out. It's really easy to make a response proactively after something bad has happened and complain about America or politics or schools or whatever it is. It's a lot harder to step into a kid's life beforehand and do something about this problem and this epidemic. Well, Dr. Redwine, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate your time. It means a lot. And if you want to check out more of our material, you can check out all of our social media sites at OTK Media, or you can check out our Patreon if you'd like to support us on a monthly basis. It's patreon.com/OTK Media. Well, thank you so much for watching this episode, and we'll catch you on the next one. Bye-bye.